So as I've been saying, we want to draw as little as possible. So for instance, I have a joist here. I don't want to have to redraw it over here. I'm just going to use the existing member that I've already created. Before I copy it though, I want to make sure that it is correct. Otherwise, I'm just going to copy all the mistakes that are in it. So I want to check and I want to make sure my angles are right. So this is minus 150 or 30. My lengths are correct. So this is 7¼ my spacing, so also this length is an 1.5 inches. Okay, so I've created this structural member. I can click and drag and hit Option, and that's going to select all the lines for me. I'm going to, now I can just duplicate it and move it from this point in time. But if I want to, like, obviously there's a few of these all over our drawings. If I want to do this again, instead of having to select them, each individual line, I can make this into a group so that it's all grouped together, it's one structural member, and I can just manipulate it and change it after the fact. So I've selected all my objects, I'm going to group them. So this is a modifier, it's up in the modify menu, it's called group. And you can see that the shortcut is Command G, and just below that is ungroup or Command U. Okay, so sometimes you're going to want to group things, manipulate them, make changes, copy them, do whatever, and then you don't need them grouped, so you can ungroup them. So be aware, they're nice, short, easy shortcuts. So again, that's Command G, and in doing so, it changes my object handles. So before it had object handles over each of the individual objects. Can you guys pause for a second? What are you doing? Okay. So now it's done this bounding box for the around the entire object. If I wanted to change this group, I can scale it just like any other object. It's going to scale it proportionally though. So not only have I made those long lines longer, I've made those spaces bigger as well. So now that 2x8 isn't actually a 2x8. I can go in and I can check that. So I've created this group. I can't actually select the individual lines, but if I double click on the group, it takes me inside the group. So I can see that around the border of my drawing pane is this yellow line, and there's this nice exit group button. So this is my signal that I've double clicked, I've gone into the group. Any changes I make are within that group. You can see that the objects outside of the group are deselected and unselectable, they're grayed. So I can make the changes that I want here. So for instance, I can check, I scaled this group. I can see now that this length is 8.5 inches, which I actually don't want. So to get out of this, I'm going to exit my group. I'm going to just undo what I did because I want to keep it the way that it was. So I can double click and go inside, and I can now check my lines. So this is still 7¼ I can trim my objects just like I can still snap to my outside objects. I just can't manipulate or modify those outside objects. I could use my trim tool.
So when you're adding, does that add to the group, or is it a separate object?
So now,
if you're in the group.
If I, for instance, if I'm in the group and if I make any changes, those changes are in the group. So I can duplicate move, and I'm going to move this 16 inches at 150 and hit OK. So now I actually have 2 structural members within that group. If I go and exit my group, if I try and move one, I'm actually moving both. Okay, so now they are grouped together. If I want to make those changes, I can double click and I could duplicate move another one, or I can delete those as well. And so it's just one structural member. So again, we want to try and copy as many correct objects as possible to reduce our amount of drawing. And this is one way to organize and keep those objects connected and as a whole object instead of individual pieces. And after I'm done, if I want to not have it grouped anymore, I can just ungroup, Command U, and now I'm back to my 6 lines. And I can still duplicate, move these as, move them as one object. They're just separate. They are still all 6 lines. So it's just because they're all selected at this time. But if I accidentally deselected one of those objects and move part of it, there's 2 lines there. Duplicate. Okay. So I could duplicate, move this, but I'm missing a piece, right? That's easy to do if it's not grouped. So use that, and then you can move them around and edit them after you've moved them. So just because they're a certain length doesn't mean they have to stay that way, but sometimes it's easier and more efficient to make it a group and then edit it after.